Hi, welcome to my video on ablatives and accusatives with prepositions. This video will go over prepositions in general, what they are, and the differences between ablatives and accusatives in those prepositions. So hopefully it'll be informative and will get us rolling on adverbial modifiers. So first we have to understand what exactly a preposition is. And to do that we have to go back even further and say what are the different parts of a sentence. So we have to remember that a sentence can be broken up into these elements. The kernel, which includes your subject, your verb, and your direct object, which basically are the things that make it a complete sentence, the bare bones of the sentence, if you will. We don't need conjunctions, we don't need modification. They're nice, but the kernel is really what makes it a complete sentence, so that's really what we need to work with there. Conjunctions can add things. These are things like and, but, etc., which allow you to add more things. So if you have two subjects, two verbs, two direct objects, or more for that matter, you can connect them and be less wordy. So that's always nice. Modification is pretty much everything else in the sentence. This is going to include your prepositions, but it's also going to include your adverbs, your adjectives, anything that isn't a part of the kernel and is not a conjunction connecting it is actually modification, including whole clauses. Okay, so we'll get to those later in the year. But modification is then broken up into two categories, and that is adverbial and adjectival modification. As their name suggests, adverbial modification will modify the clause as a whole or just the verb, and adjectival modification will just modify a single noun or series of nouns. Okay, so alright, so down in this corner here we have Scintilla in casa laborat, which is a sentence from the Oxford series. And in it you see this preposition in right there. And you know from class hopefully that in takes an ablative, and that's exactly what casa is. So what I like to do is put parentheses around these things. Now, I like this example because it's nice and simple. In the house is answering the question, where? It's not modifying Scintilla, who's right here, but it's modifying where she laborat, where she works. Okay? So this is why a preposition is going to be adverbial modification, because it typically answers questions about where or when, and those typically modify whole verbs or clauses and not just one noun. We'll get to adjectival modification in a little bit. There will be another video on that, so stay tuned for that. I just wanted to let you know today we're going to be dealing with adverbial modification only, and the focus will be on prepositions. So continue on to the next slide. You'll find that most prepositions will take either an ablative or an accusative, which is what these next two slides are going to cover. So let's first take a look at prepositions with the ablative. And for now, and I want to emphasize that, they're going to pretty much be one of these two categories with a couple exceptions, like cum, okay, which equals with. But we'll get to that in a second. First of all, you have place where, and I want to point out place where does not have to do with motion. It is simply a point in space. So like that dot right there. Alright, so if we look up here at our example, Publius in patria vivit, Publius in patria, remember we bracket those things, this is an ablative, and vivit means to live, so Publius lives in the fatherland. It is simply a place where it is like a point in space. If you look on a map, I'm sure it is represented with a dot and I want to emphasize that it is not with an arrow in this case. There's no motion involved, it is simply a place where something happens. Alright, and the other one we have is separation, which is right here. Now, I've listed a few different prepositions below. They all simplistically mean from, but they have very subtle differences in definition. So if you are really desperate, you can translate with from. If you want to show these subtleties, you can kind of see that these have different meanings. Okay. Alright, so let's take a look at our example of separation down here. And we have Publius ex patria ambulat. Okay, we know that Publius is our subject with the US ending here. And he walks ex patria, which again we parenthesis, and ex patria, again with the ablative, means out of or from the fatherland. So Publius walks out of the fatherland or from the fatherland. And this has an idea of separation, remember. And you're going to see these pretty often in Latin, and sometimes not even with a preposition. So you got to remember ablative has that idea of separation pretty often. Now, our exception to the place where in separation is this cum, right? We know so far. Okay, it means with. This is called an ablative of accompaniment. Okay, ablative of accompaniment. This is like along with. This is with a friend or with my buddy. It basically just means you're doing something with somebody else by your side. So take that for what it is. And I'm pretty sure that wraps this up. We just saw how in plus the ablative can be the ablative of place where. Which we described as a point in space. I want to point out that in, which we used for the place where, can also take the accusative of place to which I like to say is not a point but an arrow. Alright, this can mean it's a change in place, and this can mean that it is simply has to do with motion, but the idea is that you have movement. Okay, and a lot of times you will be changing place. In which case, or in this case, below you do in into the road. It kind of means that before they were off side of the road, now they're onto the road. So you are changing place onto or into whatever is the object of the preposition. So we have in via, which is our ablative, since in requires either an ablative or accusative, and ablative is the only option with an A ending. So we're thinking this is going to be our ablative of place where. So if we fly down to our example here, the women are able to walk in the house. This does not mean that they are outside the house and walking into the house. This means that they are already in the house and they are able to walk around while they are in the house. So the point in space would be the house itself. It doesn't have anything to do with changing rooms. There is an idea of motion with to walk, but since we aren't changing venues, and it's simply happening in the house in general, we have to use the ablative. But if we use the accusative, and the women are able to walk into the house, this has a different idea. Okay, so let's draw a little house. Okay. The first sentence, Feminae in casa ambulare possunt, your in casa in parentheses, of course. This is just the fact that it's happening in there, so somewhere in that house, okay? Somewhere in that house there are women, they are able to walk, okay? But the second sentence has to do with, let's say we have women outside the house. In casam means that there's again an arrow and they're able to go into the house from outside. So we see that idea of motion with our arrow, the change in venue, that we don't get in the first sentence. The first sentence, they are already in the house, and while there's motion involved with the walking, it is not. It doesn't have to do with a change in venue. So the second sentence shows that motion from outside to inside. Cool. So I hope you guys see the difference between those two. Thanks for watching, and I hope this was informative. And I hope that you continue to watch these videos on YouTube, as I think that they're good opportunities for you to review a bunch of topics from class. So feel free to email me with questions that you still have, or just ask me in class.